Well, first of all, just to say I'm delighted to be here, delighted with the invitation to come and talk to you. I'm learning a lot from this day, and I hope you learn something from the presentation I'm going to make. Really what I've tried to do here is build a slide deck that would help inform you of what's happening in Ireland in this particular area of tourist information. When Ravi and I spoke a number of weeks back when the Icelandic Tourist Board were on a journey, a fact-finding journey in Dublin, was that we have an awful lot in common. We're challenged with a lot of the same issues and problems, albeit our structures are slightly different, so we're going about it differently, but that there's a lot of shared learnings, I think. And so as much as today I think is a good start for our collaboration between the two countries, I certainly see the potential of us working closely together into the future. Just a little bit about myself first of all. I come from Waterford. It's Ireland's oldest city. It was founded by our distant relatives, the Norman Vikings, back in 914. This corner of the city here, as you see it there, and it's on a quayside here on the right, so typical in terms of the Vikings, they always looked for an area with a safe harbour, and this was exactly that. And where you see the road here on the left, that was a river just 150 years ago. That river has been moved back out of the city. And this corner here is known actually, the blocks to the front between the tower in the front and the steeple behind, that area is now known as the Viking Triangle, and everybody references this as the Viking Triangle. So there's certainly a shared heritage that we have. The only thing we're missing that ye have is that all the good-looking girls are gone out of this city. The Vikings took them and brought them all to Iceland, I believe. And I can see the evidence of that here today. And a few handsome men as well, of course. So that's me. I've worked in tourism for since I left school, effectively, left college. I was working on the trade side of the house. I worked with the Hyatt Resorts, and I worked in a number of country clubs in the States, Central, South America, and the Caribbean before returning to Ireland. And I returned to Ireland then about 20 years ago, and I've been working for the Tourist Board ever since then. So we've gone through a few evolutions and a lot of change, but I'm still there and working away on a very interesting project at the moment, which is to look at our tourist information network and to reimagine it, what that will look like in 5 years and 10 years' time, and to look at developing a roadmap in that context. So in a way, that's a process I started just 18 months ago, and it has a lot of parallels to the process you're working on yourselves here today. So just to say what I'll talk about, I'll give you a bit of background context to the tourism network in Ireland, so you have an understanding of where I'm coming from. I'll then talk to you about the project I initiated some 18 months ago, and in particular we looked at trying to understand, and I use the word, I tried to kind of de-jargonize this as much as possible, because people who marketing backgrounds, they throw out all sorts of jargon that nobody understands, and many times they don't understand it themselves. So I tried to de-jargonize the presentation. But I thought ecosystem was one I could certainly leave in Iceland. I think there would be a very good understanding of ecosystems. But in this case, I'm talking about the full information ecosystem. So from the time someone arrives to the time they leave, where do they get information? We did some studies then of best practice. We looked at digital trends. We took a hard look at ourselves, and I'll share some of those ugly truths with you as well. And then there's a question of, like, so what? So we have all this information. I'll talk to you about that, what our response has been, and then how we've operationalized our plan. And then there's one slide on just kind of our change journey from where we are today to where we want to go to. So background context, first of all, is, I'll just flick on here. This is basically the spatial spread of our tourist offices around the country back in 2008. And of course, we all remember 2008 because it was the beginning of our crisis. At that time, Fáilte Ireland, the National Tourist Board, managed over 70 tourist offices around the country. And that's where they were located. The map I'm showing you there is a heat map of where visitors go in Ireland. So during the crisis, and I'll show you in the next slide, we've contracted our network significantly, and we've contracted it into those spaces where most visitors go. And I'll talk to you about that. But this was the role we played back in 08, in that we provided, information. We provided local accommodation bookings. We had a shop. We had restaurants in some places. We obviously gave information on public transportation, route planning, and then we retailed books, maps, and so on. And that has evolved in a few ways. One, as we go forward, and you can see there, if I just go back and forth again, from that map to this map. So you can see we've consolidated quite significantly on those areas where most tourists visit. The important thing to note, though, is that the offices that we no longer run haven't gone away. They're still there. And they're either there in the form of a community tourist office, whereby in most cases they're smaller locations anyhow, and they were smaller offices and easier to manage, but they're now run by the community, and that is supported by either state or European funding schemes, or we have in smaller locations, again, information points where we provide literature for distribution. It could be in a bookstore, or it could be in a cafe or in a craft shop, and they're in particularly small locations. So what else has happened during that time is we no longer have a national accommodation booking service. We used to have our own proprietary service provided to us by a third party. They went out of business as the OTAs, the Bookings.com and Expedia and so on came in. And really the reality is there wasn't market failure any longer for bookings in holiday. That was all provided by the OTAs. We still do a bit of emergency booking, just to say, and it's through a fairly crude system of kind of pen and paper and people calling in and letting us know if they have accommodation, because they're the people who come to us still, is the people at 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon looking for accommodation that night in Dublin or in Galway or somewhere else. And rather than leave these people sleep on the street, we kind of roll up the sleeves and we have a small system in place. We try to get them to bed for the night. So it's more an emergency system now than it is, an outright accommodation system. We've also, we no longer retail. What was happening back in 08 as part of the consolidation and having to cut costs, all the regional offices, and I used to be the general manager for the Irish Tourist Board for the Southeast region, but all the region, and they were standalone organisations with their own board of directors. They were companies limited by guarantee. They were all merged into the national body. And with that, all the tourist offices came in because it was the regional companies that used to run it. But the national company does not have an economic remit. And so written into our constitution is that, we don't pass money across the counter, so to speak. So all the retail was pushed out of the tourist offices. Now that said, and I'll talk to you about our model in a moment, but we still do credit card bookings into our office for tours and attractions and transport and so on, but no cash. All of our offices are cashless, and we don't do any maps and brochures and souvenirs. And so this is what our service now looks like. But we also, in terms of the community offices that have sprung up where we've left villages and towns, we have a license agreement with them in terms of standard operating procedures, and we provide them, some of them with financial resource, a minimum amount, I should say, of financial resource, but all of them with literature, with a digital back end to their system. And then you have the 70 or so VIPs. So that's been quite a journey. In terms of how our 27 offices, I've eliminated any offices that we no longer obviously run in terms of this trend analysis. But you can see there from 2013 to 2016, kind of flatlining in around somewhere between 1 million, I should say, 600,000 visitors as we had last year, upwards towards previously around 1.8 million. And part of the big change there you'll see is in the Dublin office where we've dropped significantly, but that was due to a change of office to a much smaller location and a less prominent office, and there's a whole story behind that. But so broadly speaking, the demand from visitors to our offices is still very, very steady, still very, very robust. So in terms of this project, this was where I was starting a year and a half ago. The question was, well, look, if we're to reimagine our tourist offices, and in particular information provision, what's our starting point? So we started by trying to understand what I call kind of the information ecosystem, how people are gathering information, because we know that's evolving significantly, And the key question then will be, and we'll come to it later in this presentation, is what is our role in context of this ecosystem? So we did research across the country in the locations there of Dublin, Kilkenny, Killarney and Galway. The blacked out bit in the top you'll note is Northern Ireland, where we don't have a remit. And this is just some of the information. In total, we did about 700 plus interviews, qualitative or quantitative work, and then we supported that by some qualitative research. So just to talk about the findings, I think the interesting thing, this is an interesting slide. You can see there from day one when people arrive all the way through to kind of day 15 and on. And generally speaking, the average holidaymaker to Ireland is in Ireland for about 10 days. So it'll give you a sense of what happens over time in terms of information need. So day one, they're arriving at an airport and they need information. Now, having looked at that, we know it's generally speaking, it's transport information and orientation information. So it's a map. It's where am I, how do I get there, get to my hotel, then I'll worry about the rest of it. So there's no itinerary planning happening at this stage, needless to say, but the demand for information is huge. And these slides now are just about information in general. They're not about who should deliver that information or how. It's just the needs of the consumer. And so what ends up happening then is it dips off, and then on a day-to-day basis, you can see what the demand is of what is in effect the 100% sample of international visitors into the country. So it changes, and then towards the end of the holiday, there's a peak again. People are saying, well, look, have we missed anything? Is there anything else we should see? And we seem to get a little peak again at the tail end. So that just gives you a sense over time of people's needs and demand for information. But day one being critical just for orientation and transportation information. Then we looked at how are they accessing information. And what you see there is while in Ireland, and I'll bring up the full slide, before arriving, just to treat that first, you can see 88% of people are looking up information online, whereas only 57% of people are accessing information offline. So that would be friends and family and so on. But that changes somewhat. That relationship changes when they're in the country. Now people are using offline sources as much and more as they're using online sources. So you can see that kind of a trend as you move through the customer journey, that by the time they get to the destination, face-to-face service becomes much more important. The next then is a question of the information, how do they prefer to access that information? And that's what this slide speaks to. So albeit there's a preference towards technology from the basis that it's very convenient, very handy, Google Map or a restaurant down the street, or how do I get here or there. There's a real preference towards technology as opposed to just speaking to people, but there's a huge demand for both. And we'll come back to that in context of our strategy, because we see the question of visitor servicing and information provision not being a question of people versus technology, but of people and technology. And that's the space we certainly see ourselves in, and that's where our minds are at. In terms then, as I move it on, and obviously this is an extensive study, and I'm only sharing a few slides with you, but this then kind of relates to the Tourist Information Office. So we needed to establish that actually there was still a demand for the Tourist Information Office. And this slide speaks to that question. So first and foremost, 99% or more of all overseas visitors looked up information before arriving in Ireland. No surprise. We were somewhat surprised then by the next statistic, which was of those, and these again are all international visitors, of those 56% only continued to look up information while they were here. We probed that somewhat, and what we discovered was a lot of people, especially elderly people, have done so much research before they come. What they do is they go back to their research in the evenings. They have the research, they have their books, they have the pages turned down, so they don't look for additional information. Now, albeit I'm sure they ask for directions and so on, so it's probably not as pure as that might sound. But that's what a lot of people are doing, because they're doing so much research beforehand. But then we found that of the 56% of people who are still looking for information on holidays, 85% of them go to a tourist office, which in total equates to 51% of all international visitors to Ireland, either, when we did a study, either had gone or would and will go to a tourist office. So I think that's an important statistic, and it certainly underpins the work that we do throughout our tourist office network and the importance of the tourist office network in context of technological developments. The next slide was even more interesting because this one really threw us. And the beauty of the work we did, we initiated the work obviously with quantitative, but then we did qualitative studies to try to understand some of these statistics better. But basically what this is telling you, if you see there on the top, it's an age, right? So it's by age who visits a tourist office, who's inclined to go to a tourist office. And what it's telling you is that 67% of 16 to 24-year-olds go to a tourist office, whereas only 39% of 65-plus-year-olds go to a tourist office. Now, we were expecting that to be the converse. We thought it would be a flip of that. And that certainly surprised us. But having looked at it, we're no longer surprised because we now understand what's happening here. And we didn't understand it beforehand. What's happening here is that first and foremost, I'll start over on the far side. Elderly people are doing a lot of research. They're risk adverse and they have time on their hands. So they're in that cohort of people that are doing a lot of research before they come. As a consequence, they're less inclined to go into a tourist office. Now, I could show you another slide that would add another dimension to this, and that is that in Ireland we get an awful lot of elderly people. So 39% of our cohort of elderly people is still a lot of people going into a tourist office. So it's a statistic, though, you wouldn't pick up on just by watching the flow of visitors to an office. On the other hand, as you can see, as people get younger, they become more and more likely to go to a tourist office. And that really threw us. What we discovered here was that younger people, first and foremost, are much more spontaneous. They're much more likely to do less planning before they come to a holiday. They're more likely to arrive knowing that, yeah, there's a few good things to do in Dublin or in Ireland. And we'll do those first, and then we figure out the rest of it. But what we also found from speaking to young people was that they also understand the limitations of technology. And we'll come on to that in a minute. But that they recognize that if they want to get good, local, personalized advice, the place to go isn't necessarily their phone. It's to somebody in the know. And as you see here, 6-7 times out of 10, that's a tourist office. And that's the big difference. And that was a huge insight because it means that the market of tourist offices isn't in any way dying off. It continues to grow and feed itself because of the value of the service that we provide. So just to go through this, just two quick slides. There's some of the big highlights, big takeaways from the study. But these are just a few other pointers to keep in mind. So the first one we've already covered. The second one, no surprise, 7 in 10 users use their own phone in context of holidays in Ireland. People are suffering from information overload because there's no longer a shortage of information. Information is everywhere. The problem is, how do you filter that information and personalize it to you? That's the challenge, the big challenge that visitors face. The human touch has not gone away. Even, you've probably all heard the reference to the silent traveler. This would be the early adopter, the geeky guy or girl who does everything off their phone and has done long before we even knew how to turn the things on. They're now asking people to rehumanize their travel experience. They want to come off the online world and engage with people. And we're seeing that as a major trend. Now, how far you can extrapolate such a trend remains to be seen. But certainly the human touch is critically important, and especially in a business like hospitality and tourism, where it's all about the human touch. In terms of where our TIOs are, we would all like to think that having traveled halfway across the world to come to Iceland, that they would at least travel 10 minutes out of their way to find a tourist office. No, they won't. We need to be where the tourists are. That's what they're telling us. They're saying, listen, you're a credible part of the overall information jigsaw. We get you. We think you provide a great service. But, we'll forego you if you make us work too hard to find you. So we have to be in the right place. So any strategy for further evolution and development of the tourist office service has to take this into consideration. It's not just the older visitor who's coming into us. So again, we've clarified this point. There's the devil in the detail. The closer people get to a holiday, the more detail they need. And that's where, again, the tourist offices, the tourist board literature, or the local literature comes in, because that has the opening times, the closing times, the issues, then the devil in the detail of security, as I'm listening to here this morning, which isn't something that's really on our radar in Ireland. But again, it's this devil in the detail. That's critical to the service we provide, that we provide the detail of information. And it's the type of detail that nobody wants to really engage before they come on a holiday. But when they're here, they need it. Maps and pocket guides are still very, very valuable. What we found about maps is that people struggle to orientate themselves off an iPhone. They just find the interface too small. Whereas if they have a map out in front of them, they get that they're here and they're going there, they can write notes and so on, and the guides as well. As long as the guides are small enough, pop in the pocket, use it during the day, it'll become a really, really good tool. And we've done a bit of work just in terms of tweaking our own print collateral as a consequence of this key insight. And then, where have all the accommodation bookings gone? General information search is now the #1 search for visitors arriving in Ireland, and making a booking is at 71%. But in terms of in the tourist offices, and we still provide, as I say, a service, only 1% of visitors to our tourist office even request to make an accommodation booking. Some of them we redirect back to their phone because it's a better medium, and others we do the job for. But certainly, I think there's a big question over our role in adding value in this space. And I just pose it here as a question. Now, we also undertook learning journeys. So we looked to learn from others. Some we visited, others we researched online and Skyped them and spoke to them and so on. So we were looking for tourist boards around the world that were doing a really, really good job in this space. And the key learnings from us was, one, consistency is key, particularly in brand and messaging. Be clear about what your role is. So be quite succinct about what you do, but then what you don't do, and promote that out front. And that's, again, what we saw as best practice. It's not about human versus technology, it's human and technology. That's where the best solution lies. That people will say that the best technology in the world is amplified hugely if you have a human brain as an interface between it and the consumer. And that's the direction in which we're taking our tourist offices, just to note. And then the fact that a coherent network is a huge advantage. So I start with the coherent network. Well, no, sorry, I don't. I talk about the consistency first. I'll work my way across. Visit New Zealand have this particular symbol that they use for all the tourist offices across the country. And it's a joint initiative between the National Tourist Board and the local authorities throughout the country. But they're absolutely consistent in their brand, in their signage, in their literature, and this ultimately builds trust and it builds relevance from a visitor perspective. It's also a symbol that shows up earlier in the customer journey when they're searching out the holiday, when they're looking and researching the holiday, so on the New Zealand website and so on. So there's confidence in it. They do a great job in that regard. Scotland, we thought, did a great job in telling people what it is exactly that they do and repeating that, verbatim, time and time again. In Madrid, an office I visited not that long ago, I think they've done a really good job of blending technology with the human interface. What you see there, and that's an accessible desk, and in fact, if anybody really wants to look at a brilliant accessible office, be it for the visually impaired, or the hearing impaired, or for any impairment, this is a great office. They've done some wonderful things in it. It's just there in Plaza Mayor in the center of Madrid. You can see one of the monitors and screens facing the customers, and the lady at the desk, she has her own screen. So they can see what she can see. And so it's never a case of the person you're dealing with having their head buried in a screen while you're waiting for them to come back to you. So it's a very seamless experience. Now, they've also built in a really excellent mapping system, and based on your needs, they'll print out a bespoke map with your itinerary on it, or your bus routes, or your A to Z and how to get there. It's pretty impressive. But what they've done here is what we're now trying to replicate in Ireland. And then the coherent network. This is the best example of a coherent network that I came across. There are probably many others. In Australia, they do it by region, and the coherence of the network works really well until regions come up against each other. And then all of a sudden, you have tourist offices on one side of the border, not promoting activities on the other side, albeit they could be 5 or 10 miles away. So you get into that border mentality. And that's something, look, we all struggle with a little bit. It's true of Ireland as well. But the coherence of their network and the benefits of that are obviously from a visitor perspective, that every last one of their tourist offices delivers a full New Zealand service, albeit the majority of the queries and questions that come in are about the particular area. They can still service someone, and New Zealand has parallels with Ireland, which is parallels with Iceland, being small island nations, and people do a lot of touring around. So somebody who could be South Island in the morning could be heading North Island that evening, and they need that service. And that's what they deliver. They deliver that coherent service, and they have coherent standards. There's economies of scale in what they do from a digital perspective, from a literature perspective, from a training perspective, and it's a really good model to look at. So moving along, then what we learned about digital trends. Obviously, mobile, is a growing influencer. We all have our smartphones nowadays, and that's making all sorts of services available to us that wouldn't have been there beforehand. And it also facilitates a very seamless journey from your information searching beforehand, your booking, even now your check-in, and then apps that provide you services on the ground. So a big driving force, no surprises there. In terms of personalization, and you'll be familiar, everyone's talking about personalization and localization at the moment. They're the two big ones. This is what everybody is really working to solve the problem of, to be able to personalize and localize. They're kind of the, I'd often say they're the two sides of the same coin. In terms of personalization, we're certainly, in a technological perspective, moving much more towards a predictive environment, but we're a long way off it, and big data will have a lot to play in terms of this regard. Speaking to experts in this field, they'll tell you that the predictive, the technology that will know you as somebody holidaying with your friends as opposed to with your wife or your kids, are depending on time of year, is a long way off. So in terms of getting really personalized feedback back from systems, we're a long way away from that. And I'll talk about some of the systems in a minute, but they still are quite crude. They're probably better at localization than they are personalization, but they still have a long way to travel. I think they're at very early stages. The other trend, as I was saying, is local. And if you go on any of these websites, they'll all talk to you about local input to their content, that their content is developed by local experts. This is about where the locals go, and so on, so on, so on. And they're trying to build trust, and they all talk about making it easy for you. And I'm not sure they have solved that making it easy problem yet. In fact, I don't think they have. Some of them, like Unique Trip, which is the Like a Local guide that you have over here and the little app beside it, they're now introducing local heroes. So you can now go online on this app. You can hook up with a local hero, and he'll, through a kind of a back and forth process, provide you with a personalized itinerary based on your needs. And then I think that's for €10. And then when you're in country, if you want to change things or change your day, you can buy additional services from that local hero. So what they're doing now is they're monetizing that person-to-person, peer-to-peer advice. So there's a lot to watch in this space, and we're certainly watching it closely. We're watching it and we're thinking, is there stuff we can leverage off? Certainly there's something in this unique, Trip Unique model that may have resonance or may have implications for how we go forward in terms of trying to reach out to people before they come. But so there's a lot happening here in the local space. The other big trends that I think we have to watch as tourist boards and as people who provide tourist information services is the whole issue of in-destination tours and activities. Needless to say that the three big ones in terms of what has been monetized and commercialized really, really well to date is flights, accommodation, and car rental. A lot of companies now are looking at in-destination, but they're struggling with it, particularly in tours and activities, because a bit like, say, the bed and breakfast market in accommodation, they're just not plugged in online. They're mom and pop operations or they're small operations. 50-60% of them aren't online. and certainly aren't online from a booking perspective. They may have a page or two online, but they're not booking. So the likes of your Viator, which was bought by TripAdvisor in the last couple of years, is making headways into that market. Their focus right now is really on cities and the low-hanging fruit of big attractions, but they'll continue to develop that service. The concern I'd have with it is they're also layering in a 20% commission on what is already kind of a small ticket price if you look at attractions over car rental and accommodation. So again, it needs to be looked at. In Ireland, we have our own proprietary systems working quite well, and we charge the industry 7%. But we're not losing sight of what's happening in this space. The other one is, another example of this now is Airbnb's trips. So they're moving beyond just accommodation. You can now, and it used to be before, if your host, had a special talent, he could bring you off and bring you to the opera or bring you for a walking tour or whatever it might be. They've expanded now beyond the accommodation hosts. So if you have a particular talent, you're local, and you want to make a few pounds, you can now put your services up on Trip. So it's all about they've got their accommodation, now they're looking to wrap more of the experience around that. So you can see again, in holiday, looking to deliver personalized service. That's what a lot of these companies are doing. So my key takeaway in all of this is technology, you can obviously read that there. Online is becoming the driving force across the journey. So particularly from the research phase, the early research phase in through booking, the detailed research phase before you come, and then to a lesser degree in holiday, and then certainly post-holiday through social media. It's also a huge driving force. That said, what they're all chasing right now is personalization and local personalization, and that's really in its infancy. How quickly that will advance remains to be seen, and then the uptake of that by people remains to be seen. And the monetization of in-holiday services, tours and attractions still remains a challenge, albeit there are big companies now working on it. There would have been a multitude of micro companies that were in that space but weren't able to make it work. But certainly the likes of a Viator, who are now leveraged through the visitor numbers into TripAdvisor, that's the one I think to watch. And there are others also chasing Expedia and Expedia Trips now and so on. So a few things happening there. In terms then of the human element, we're certainly hearing one of the SCIFT conferences last year was focusing on this area of the resurgence of face-to-face, the humanization of travel, and how many people now wanting to go tech-less or tech-light on holidays. So there's a bit of a pushback because technology is such a pervasive force now in all of our lives that a lot of people now are saying, well, look, I wouldn't mind pushing it aside when I go on holidays and take a break, not just from work, but technology. So that's a trend I think we have to watch. There's no doubt about it, more than ever before, people aren't willing to be led by the nose around the country. They want personalization. They want to develop their own itinerary. It may ultimately end up looking like very similar to other people's itineraries, but the point being they want to be the ones that build it. So even though mobile penetration is huge, digital personalization is still very crude. So I think there's kind of different forces there at work. And I really just say, look, it informs our thinking at the moment, but we know enough to know that this will change over time as well. The last thing then, and you're wondering, this is kind of like paralysis by analysis. How much analysis did you do? And so we were for a little while like this sheep just standing there. He's been there for a couple of weeks now, I think, since I put this presentation together. And we were a little bit like that. The last thing we did in terms of learning and putting our strategy on a good foundation was we took a good look at ourselves. Now, I haven't changed this slide since this morning, but is there anything familiar here? I was reading this just before lunchtime. I got this exactly some of the issues that you're probably facing. So, to talk you through it. One, that our TIO network feels disconnected from the mothership in the centre in Dublin. Two, that the three-tiered structure that we have of Fáilte Ireland offices, community offices, VIPs, makes service control very difficult. That the lack of a consistent identity is felt to be very confusing. And I'll talk to you about that in a moment. There's a lack of differentiation between the official TIO network and private information officers, and the consumer doesn't quite get the difference. The TIO networks have been through a period of change and are cautious about future change. So a lot of what I showed you there from 08 to 16, like all we were about for 6 or 7 years was cutting costs, trimming back the overhead bills and getting our headcount down to a certain level by a certain amount of time, and everything else went by the wayside. So they started to feel like a disconnected tribe, and there was no love coming back their way. And then the last one, there's a need for greater communication and connectivity. So we were kind of starting over and say we need to rebuild this family that we value so much. So the so what to all of that then is, well, what ultimately did that all lead to? What decisions did we make? How did we now start to reimagine our role in information provision? So the challenge we put to ourselves in the context of the evolving information ecosystem, the TIO, so the Tourist Information Office, needs to identify which visitor needs it is best placed to meet using its people, technology, and a combination of both. And it's not just a case of meeting needs for the sake of meeting needs. You know, ultimately, if the needs are being provided for and they're being provided for well, in a relevant way, in an unbiased way by others, well, then we just step out of the way, just get out of our own way. But if they're not, there's certainly a role for us, and that's what we felt, to make sure the visitor ultimately has, you know, the best holiday experience in the country. We recognized these strengths. You know, we're an in-destination service, a very good in-destination service. The human interaction is critically important that we provide, the customized advice that we offer. We're seen as having trusted local knowledge. People are able to plan first, then book. In terms of just another way of kind of breaking up a bit of the process people go through when building a holiday is that it's very hard to go online and start booking places when you haven't got an itinerary first and foremost. So you kind of need a bit of planning first to know, you know, how long you'll spend in one attraction before you go to another place, or how long the journey is between one and another. So the beauty of a tourist office is you can do that planning first, and then we can also provide you with the booking facilities. And then central locations, if we are in central locations, and in most cases we are. Some of the shortcomings, we're not offering a service before the trip. The service is restricted to fixed locations, and worse still if you're in a bad fixed location. It's also restricted to fixed times. We have opening times and closing times, and there's significant cost implications of keeping offices open later or earlier. And then the project, it isn't scalable. It's very hard to scale without, you know, putting huge investment into the number of tourist offices that you have. So unlike digital platforms, you can scale much easier. That this isn't scalable. So these are some of the weaknesses of the system. So with that in mind, our response has been this, and I'm kind of coming to the meatier part of the presentation, because that all really sets the scene for some of the decisions we've made. We first of all, very simply, developed what we call our guiding, our North Star, our guiding light. What we're trying to achieve is to facilitate visitors to have the holiday of a lifetime in Ireland. So that's the outcome that we want to get to. We want to facilitate that end game, because if we know if we can do that, the people will leave then as ambassadors to the country, and we'll have done our job. But we want to do that by making it easy, and easy is critically important. If you go on any of the websites nowadays that are trying to work on, that are assisting people plan their holidays, or that are purporting to be in holiday, you know, apps that help you get around and so on, look out for the word easy. It's everywhere. They're all trying to corner this concept of making it easy, because the reality is it is anything but easy because of the information overload that's out there. So people are trying to make it easy. But I think we do it in a particularly good way, and we need to make sure that any investment we make in the service has to make it easy for visitors to overcome the what to do problem. And we think that's the problem. That's what we're all about. We're not necessarily, you know, first and foremost about booking accommodation as we might have been in the past, or selling literature, or selling souvenirs, albeit in some models that's absolutely necessary for financial purposes, and it also provides a service. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but it's not the center of what we do. It's the what to do problem. It's the case of, I guess, if we were just to stop for a moment and ask the question, how many of you are going on holidays this summer? So just a show of hands. Okay, go for it. Keep your hands up. Keep your hands up. How many of you have booked your flights? How many of you have booked your accommodation? How many of you have booked things to do and know what you're going to do on the ground, right? Okay, so some have, but you can see how that drops off, right? And that's the reality. There's a good focus. There's a good test case. That's the reality. That's the what to do problem. And I think we all know the what to do problem is problematic, because you're traveling with your loved one, you could be traveling with your family, you could be traveling with your friends. The needs are different in all of those situations. And we've all spent endless hours online trying to figure things out. And we're looking at different sources to the extent at the end of the search, we don't even know which sources we went to. And so there's no trust in most of what we saw. And so this is a big problem, and people are spending huge number of hours on this. Now we can solve it once they get here. We need to promote that in advance. People need to know that is the case, that when they get here, there is a problem solver to this problem that will make it easy and will package it up for you in a matter of 10 minutes, as opposed to 10 hours. And it is literally a 10-hour job, generally speaking, research will tell us. So that's the big one. And the thing we're looking at is, can we get at that particular problem before they come, in the weeks before they come. If it's a short break, it tends to be the last 10 days. If it's a longer break, it'll be within the month, 2 months of coming. They start to encounter this problem. So the first thing we're doing is a couple of things in terms of how we're kind of re-looking at our role in information provision. What we've got up there top there, we're first widening our lens to say that, look, we don't own the information. We don't need to own it. We don't need to be precious about our information. But what we do want to do is be the resource of really good, accurate, up-to-date information. And then, as best possible, to push that information out to this ecosystem. Because the consumer tells us that they're all good sources of information. And the consumer also tells us, from an Irish perspective, they say it might be a little bit different if it was St. Petersburg or Moscow, where you kind of go, oh, you wouldn't just take advice from anybody. And that's what they told us. I'm not picking on St. Petersburg or Moscow. That was actually part of the feedback we got. And they used that example. I'm sure there's many other places. But they said, in Ireland, you're kind of a friendly bunch of people. We're happy to take advice from any of you. All right? Problem is, our concern is that they're probably getting bad advice in some of those locations. They also say, like, from a taxi driver, the taxi driver is really good to tell them what are the nice areas and what are the bad areas to stay away from. But the barman is really good in terms of what's the next pub to go to or a good restaurant to go on to. That front of house, if they have the time, they're good to help you build an itinerary and so on and so on. So we've done a little bit of a study of the role that they do. So we certainly see ourselves now as kind of central to this ecosystem on the ground. So we're going to hopefully have much more impact, and to do it without fear of putting ourselves out of business. And the reality is, if we do, we do. If we put ourselves out of business, we put ourselves out of business. And that's less of a cost to the state. That wouldn't be a problem from our perspective. But we don't believe we'll do that, because we believe the service we provide and the skills we have are essential to make this whole thing work. And the sweet spot of what we do is not dish out maps, but it's help people solve the things to do problem and to build that into an itinerary. And like Iceland, a lot of people are touring. They're heading out of the cities. They're heading from one location to another. And even the commercial tourist offices, we've done a bit of mystery shop on them. They're good about telling you, what's happening around the corner or down the street. But you say to them, I'm leaving Dublin in the morning. I'm heading towards Kilkenny. What route should I go? Blank face. They go, oh, you should go down to the tourist office. So there's a huge role for us. The next thing we did is we've lengthened our view in terms of just seeing ourselves in holiday, or on holiday as I have it there. We're also back here in the kind of the stage after booking, the inspiration for activities on holidays, that intensive traveling. And we're looking at ways of how we can be more impactful there. And to do that, we've got to obviously work very closely with our marketing department. So I just put it here. So what does that all look like on a Monday morning? I have a couple of colleagues in work that often say that to me. They say, Gary, all the strategy stuff is great and all this high-level thinking is great, but geez, I've got to go to work on Monday. What does that look like? What am I meant to do? Tell me. So we broke it into 9 bundles. I think your 4 bundles are much more discreet and better. I'm going to take a lesson from that. I think I could do with bundling up a little bit. But these were our 9 bundles, right? And I won't go into them in any detail, but it's just that we have, these are work bundles, basically. So the first thing we want to do, we want to develop a consistent service across our 3-tiered network. And back to those bundles, so that's consumer experience, service provision, education and training, network standards, and management. So obviously these bundles overlap. So that's what we're working on there to try to deliver. And we've started this year with a new training program. It's a face-to-face training program at the moment, so unfortunately it can't be leveraged as you could do with technology. And it's all about training people, not just in customer care, but in how to help deliver on the promise. So they understand the promise marketing is making internationally, and they can help, they can, within that context, deliver their service, something that they do extremely well anyhow. The next one is we're putting our people I won't say back at the centre, but certainly back at the centre from our thinking perspective. They've always been at the centre of our in-office experience. That's just a shot of the background there is our new tourist office in Dublin. What does that look like? We're now designing new offices at the moment for 4 other locations in Ireland, our gateway offices. If anybody knows Ireland, if my hand was Ireland, you've Dublin here, Kilkenny just down from it, Cork over here, and Galway here. So it'd be 4 main gateways, and we're developing a new office. So we're putting ultimately our people at the centre of it. We're taking away the desks because we find the desks create a bottleneck not just for staff but also for visitors. The offices are smaller now than what we would have had in the past because we don't need retail. We've built those stations, as you can see them there, and a little pod to the front so that this is modular. It'll work for different size offices or different shape offices. And from from the staff perspective, they have everything that they need. They don't have to be getting down off their full stool to be running around grabbing stuff. We've lots of little drawers and cubby holes and all the stuff that travel advisors like. So we've gone into a lot of detail to get that right. We also have the monitors, as in Madrid, on the desk, so that the travel advisor will have a laptop and that'll project an image onto the screen. And the whole thing is about the travel advisor being able to have one-to-one or one-to-many personalized conversations with their visitor. That's the key. That's the center of what we're providing. That's the service we provide. There'll be racks and information. And to the front door here, you can't see it where that blue mark is. We have like a little, kind of like the Apple benches. So people can come in. We've stripped out all the technology. You would have seen in the Dublin office, and I have a video on the Dublin office. We're probably out of time, I'm sure, but I do have a video on the Dublin office. The music wouldn't work, so we can put it on beforehand. But we're stripping back the technology, the self-service technology, because we find it's only used by kids occupying themselves while their parents are getting the real service. And so we're stripping out a lot of technology out of our offices. I think there's a place for technology in other locations, and it certainly allows you to deliver a 24/7 service in places where you wouldn't have a physical presence. But this service is all about the face-to-face. That's an example of the station, and you can see there, the drawers, and there's little cubby holes actually now built into the side bit as well. There's information on the desk, and the idea being that the travel advisor has everything on hand that they require to deliver that service. And then there isn't noise pollution either. A lot of times, like we have an office in Limerick, and I went into it last summer, and the office isn't big, but you had literally 14 people in one corner and nobody in the rest. And you had 2 travel advisors, and you had a bunch of people hanging over both of them. And how anybody knew what anybody was saying, I don't know, and yes, you have all this empty room. So these are the type of things we're trying to address. And I'm sure these are familiar issues for all of you, because we still have offices that are all desks. In terms of creating a consistent brand, we haven't helped ourselves first and foremost in this space. We even have different brands. We have the Discover Ireland Centre, which was aligned to Discover Ireland website, to the Discover Ireland campaign that we used to run, which was a home holidays campaign. And at the time, even Tourism Ireland, who are the equivalent of your Promote Iceland, their website was Discover Ireland. So the whole thing seemed to kind of make sense and hold together. Subsequently, Tourism Ireland, now their website is ireland.com. We no longer have a Discover Ireland website per se. We've invested in different websites. We still have Discover Ireland over the door of many of our offices. We also have the likes of Visit Dublin over our door, and we have Tourist Office over our door. So we haven't helped at all. But I guess our eyes have been on other objectives over the last number of years. That's just back to the point I was making earlier. And then you have the likes of this fella, Paddy Wagon Tours. They all have tourist offices, and they're gaudy looking green things. But to be honest, the visitor is not quite sure of the difference. They have a big tourist office over the door and all looks very Irish, and in they go. And that's fine, but we know what they are. They're actually booking offices, but we've no legislation around that. The concern isn't from our perspective. My concern would be from the visitor's perspective, that they get the service, the unbiased and comprehensive service that they should get, but they don't. So there's confusion there as well. So we've kind of confusion at 2 levels. What we've done about that, and this is very basic, but we think as it is basic, it's also the right thing to do. So there was a lot of conversation when we looked at how we would rebrand our tourist offices. One, what would we call them? And I think we're just bringing it more in line with European norms. We're calling them centres as opposed to offices. I think office slightly has that kind of back office connotation, administrative connotation. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I don't think there was huge confusion there anyhow, so probably a minor thing. We looked at the I sign, and obviously, the I sign is ubiquitous. You can't not have the I sign. Question is there any way you can bring a little bit of differentiation into the particular I sign that we use? And we felt it wasn't in the I, but it was in the bubble. And that the bubble speaks also to the core of our value, the core of our service, which is to provide face-to-face advice and communication with somebody. So that's the little voice bubble. You see what I'm talking about there? The little triangle that comes up off the O. So we're going to use that, and we'll use that across the board. And then the bigger issue here for us was our company is Fáilte Ireland. So initially it seemed the sensible thing to do, because we didn't want to get into official tourist information centre and start expanding the name, and because there was a concern we're not seen as the official one. Nobody recognises us as the official one, and so that's a big challenge. So the challenge we gave to the designers, first of all, is come up with a facade that speaks to official, without us having to put the word up there. So that's why we're going to do now limestone or marble cladding on our buildings. And the presentation as it is does what it says on the tin. It looks sharp. It doesn't look tacky. It doesn't look like the cheaper version or the tacky version of a facade. But the bigger issue then was, what would the logo be? What would the endorser? Who owns this thing? And our company is Fáilte Ireland. And the company that markets Ireland internationally is called Tourism Ireland. Well, we're taking the decision now that we're actually going to put their brand on our door, which is a strange thing because, look, I've been in tourism a long number of years as a regional manager, as a county officer, as a regional manager, now at national level doing different jobs, and there's always tensions, as you can imagine. And I've no doubt there's tensions between the structures in Iceland. The important thing is that they're healthy tensions. And that there's tensions, between the tourist board in Iceland and Promote Iceland, and there is with us as well. And in ways, sometimes personalities get in the way. But our position on this was that, look, this is the right thing to do from a visitor perspective. That's ultimately, when we got to that, it made the decision for us that this is the right decision. The consumer is familiar with this in advance of coming. They've travelled that journey. They've gone on the website, if they have, that is. But there's a better chance they have than they've seen that than they've seen our logo, which is really an administrative company. So we're now going with Tourism Ireland on the facade as the endorser of these stores, and we think that will communicate very simply the officialness of our stores. And then obviously the office is, as depicted in the previous slide, it's about that face-to-face, helping people solve that what to do problem. We're also now looking at how we can, the apps and that are all fine, but we're also looking, partnering Tourism Ireland, on how we engage earlier in the visitor journey, so in that planning phase. And we are piloting a project at the moment called, the community process. It's a community app, community service, that you can post questions online and people from around the country can respond and so on. It's more open, I think, than it needs to be in terms of it's open software. Anybody can go on, and obviously you get a rating over time, so you either get dropped off the system or you don't. I'm not sure that it's going to work, but the intention is right, and we'll continue to work on that for a time. There may be other solutions, and we certainly have other ideas of how we can start to deliver that personal, more face-to-face, or albeit not face-to-face, but person-to-person service before people come to the country. And we're not quite sure how that scales either in terms of from a resource perspective. We're also providing, and this is a small thing, but a more uniform print portfolio. In Ireland at the moment, you have the Ireland brand and you have 3 sub-brands. One is the ancient east of the country, Dublin, and the Wild Atlantic Way, which is the coastal route all along the west of the country. And we're just ensuring that all of the literature that's provided through all of our networks, is basically these 3 guides, and then a series of, we produce about 30 different maps for each of the main towns or villages, and that it all speaks to the brands. So again, it's integration back into the rest of the organization. The last thing, now I'm nearly finished. This is really important. I won't go reading that out, but I'll just make the point that I'm back to the conversation you were having this morning, and Ravi was talking about the need for additional funding, that this all won't happen without additional funding. This slide here speaks to additional funding. This slide is all about us being able to demonstrate our value in the marketplace. When there's no shortage of people, and even our own minister said to me recently, "Sure, Gary, isn't that your tourist office?" Right? And a lot of people think like that. and they see solutions in black or white. Either we need them or we don't need them. So there's absolutely a need to continue to educate ministers, government officials, and so on, of the value of the service and of where the service lives within the overall ecosystem of information provision. Because without the work we've done, it would be very hard to make the case that we're now making at the moment for the need to continue to invest in the offices. We say, look, we may have a different conversation with you in 10 years' time, but right now this is the right direction for us to be traveling in. So look, in summary, this is the change journey that we're on. We were kind of very much an organizational silo, not talking to the rest of the organization. We're now looking to fully integrate with the organization. That I live within the marketing and communications directorate of our organization, and that's with the objective of making sure that marketing, who's looking at the earlier stages in the visitor's journey, isn't disconnected from the really, really important part of the journey when they're here on the ground delivering on their experience. We are still focused on the bricks and mortar perspective, which is the offices, but we're taking a broader ecosystem perspective. So we're going to play a bigger game, a larger role, particularly in our cities, of pushing out information through all the other channels that visitors tell us that they access information through. We're going to see how can we ensure that information is of quality. We have always been focused on in-destination. We're now moving through the visitor journey. So we want to move back and add more value before people come. We would have been information focused. Now information is everywhere. And even in a way we looked at, is there any way to change the name of tourist information office? Is there any way of getting rid of information? And there isn't really, and people get anyhow what it is you're talking about, because it's so much more than information now. It's not just information. Information is everywhere. And if that was our unique selling proposition, we would be out of business. There would be no need for us. But now it's all about travel planning, personalization, focus. We want to go from having multiple identities to a consistent, differentiated identity, and our network is quite loose at the moment. We want to really kind of build on the coherence of our network, so we generate a lot more value. So look, I thank you for giving me your attention. I'm sorry, I know that's a bit long of a presentation, but I know at the same time I'm talking to colleagues who are facing many of these issues as well. So I hope I haven't gone into too much detail. So if you have any questions, I'd be delighted to take questions now at this time.